I found a very good $26 bottle of bourbon. This is now my new go-to cheap bourbon, without a doubt. Evan Williams Single Barrel.
Oh yeah.
I'm always on the look, before I go buy. If I want to look for something new, I always check the, top 10 bourbons, yada, yada, yada. But specifically, I like looking for the ones that are like top 10 list under $60 or $50 or whatever, because I cannot buy an expensive bottle of booze without feeling like a sucker. I cannot shake that feeling.
Right.
So looked at one of those lists, and sure enough, Evan Williams Single Barrel is on there. I've never drank Evan Williams. It's one of those brands I've never picked up. And I went and picked it up on the shelf yesterday, and I'm like, $26. And I sit there and looked at it, and I'm like, man, even I'm a little worried about that. It's $26 bottle of bourbon. I'm like, all right, well, I'll give it a shot. It can't
especially
be
a single barrel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and dude, it's a very good, smooth, very smooth. I mean, I like it better than this $45 bottle of bourbon I bought a few weeks ago, by far.
Nice.
It stands up against this Basil Hayden I bought.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely it does.
Nice.
Yeah, it's solid, man.
So I don't particularly, as far as just like the standard Evan Williams, I drink my whiskey straight, and I think you guys know that. Like, I'll just do whiskey or bourbon and a few cubes of ice, or like an ice sphere or something. Evan Williams, I absolutely recommend for whiskey and cokes. So you should dilute that with sugary goodness for the coke, because it's not particularly great. But I haven't tried the single barrel yet, so I'll grab a bottle of that next time I need one. I've been drinking a brand called Noble Oak. Have you heard of that?
Oh yeah, that's the one I sent you the picture of a few weeks ago.
Oh, was it? Okay, maybe that's why I picked it up. I couldn't remember, but I dig it. I like it a lot. I was at one point had been drinking. I tried Redemption, but I had been drinking Bullet or Bullier. I think it's Bullet. But I found out the owner of Bullet is a huge 45 supporter, and apparently disowned his lesbian daughter. So that was a sad day in my life where I had to stop drinking, and first world problems. But I had to quit drinking the whiskey I liked because of something.
Well, Bullet, there's nothing I'll ever miss about not drinking that again. That is the most bench standard.
It and Jim Beam. I hold it and just Jim Beam kind of in the same regard. For a standard, for $5 more I can have better, but it's yeah, it just is kind of a baseline.
Yeah, I bought it once and I was like, and it wasn't bad. It was just boring. It's the same reason I don't buy Gentleman Jack.
Right.
It's boring. It's just not. There's no complexity to that booze. Just tastes very, very standard. But I mean, I realize that's what some people like, is something very uncomplex. They want something very. I mean, it feels very vanilla.
Well, then again,
and I just don't. I'd rather drink something that's a little bit more complex than that.
No, for sure. And again, I think a lot of people get that to make mixed drinks, and I could be wrong in that assessment. I'm just kind of speaking out of my ass, really, for no other purpose of trying to justify my faith in people. But I do think that when it comes to drinks, to whiskeys like that, a lot of people just choose to get it because they know they're going to mix it, or it's just what it is.
I got it. I started drinking Gentleman because I knew some people that, I mean, they just drank it on the rocks or drink it with water, and it's not bad. And if you've never had, I mean, because if all you've ever drank is stuff like Jim Beam, Evan Williams, Jack Daniels, you're accustomed to that one-dimensional flavor, and that's the best way I can describe it, as one-dimensional. And it's not a bad quality booze. I can't say I'm just saying it's just a little too boring.
It's the baseline.
Yeah.
It's kind of like reading, and we can tie this into comics. It's kind of like reading a comic that you can tell is just absolutely like comics by formula. And that doesn't make it bad. It doesn't mean you can't be entertained by it. It doesn't mean the art can't be pretty, but it's just totally run-of-the-mill, baseline. This is just a story that they put out to put out a story.
I did splurge on some double oaked Woodford, though.
Oh, really?
That's my favorite, double oaked Woodford. But it's over $50. So over $50. So I don't buy it very often at all.
I got thirsty at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I bought those 3 bottles yesterday. I got like a whole bunch of like credits, that you earned on your credit card, So essentially I got them for free because I'm using my points to buy. And so I bought those 3 bottles yesterday, and I had to make myself stop at 3 drinks yesterday so I wouldn't feel a little foggy today.
Some people have airline miles. Matt has shot glasses.
Yeah. Booze points on my credit card.
Well, hey everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the beautiful, the wondermous Southern Fried Geekery podcast. As usual, and as most Sunday mornings, I looked at my wallet and it still says that I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
Matt Trogdon.
And I'm Craig Lance.
And I missed you guys all week.
Yeah.
Same here.
You've had a busy week, haven't you?
Yeah, I think,
So I was just going to say something new for me this past week is I had a week every day for the week. I had teleconferences every day. So I was on camera for hours upon hours throughout the day. That was a new experience.
You
can't scratch your face with a clear conscience. You're like,
Did you only dress from the waist up?
No, this is I just dressed in casual clothes. One guy did get busted. He showed up every day wearing a blazer, and he did get busted when he stood up and his shorts were on camera. He got called out.
That's funny.
Everybody had a good laugh. Yeah.
Well, I started
not as funny as the video that Caleb shared though, with the guy that was running the Zoom meeting. And
I didn't
turned
watch
it off.
I didn't watch that. I was like, I don't need to see how this ends.
It ended just how you thought it ended.
Yeah.
Anyways, Caleb, you started a new job.
I did. I started a new job. Fun times. I'm actually getting to do some legal work now. So, been in the office all week, and I get to retire now, right? Like this. That's how this works. I work the full week. I get a pension. Get to go home.
Yes.
That's what I was told.
And I've been cheated.
Yeah, me too.
No, I did that, and then my baby brother got married last night. So,
well, congrats to him and to you and to the family.
Yeah, well, I didn't really.
How old is
anything
he?
to do with it. So he was. He's 22. No, he 22. He got out of college. He's been dating her for about 2.5 years now, and finally tied the old knot. So proud of the kid. So there's 10 years difference between he and I. But he's a good kid, and he has a incredibly intelligent, incredibly driven, fierce, and gorgeous wife now. And I am proud to have her as a new sister. So
nice,
fun times. And then I got to read,
for sure,
a few comics this week, which was awesomeness. And that's what. So if you're new to the show, welcome. We're glad to have you. We are going to talk about some comics, some of which are kind of brand newish. So I want to throw out a spoiler warning. Of course, we're going to tell you what the comics are, and we'll put the names in the show notes. So if you haven't read them yet and you intend to, you can go ahead and skip on down the line a little bit, because I'm going to talk about something that came out that's a little bit older, and I'd have no idea what the other guys are going to talk about. But just check the show notes and listen up, and don't get anything spoiled. We absolutely do not want to ruin your reading experience. We know what that's like. It's no bueno. But in that sense, we can't really talk about comics without digging into some of the meat and potatoes of it, which is why we gather here today. For marriage. No.
To celebrate this thing called life.
Yeah. I'm gonna have like wedding things stuck in my brain for like the next 2 weeks, undoubtedly. But if you want more of this stuff, chatting about comics, if you want more of seeing comics, like what we're reading, all of that fun stuff, we have got a pretty wide social media footprint. You can come to our Facebook group. You can join that. We're talking about stuff. You can find us on the Instagrams and the Twitters. We're at SFG Podcast on both of those. And, if you ever have any questions, you got anything you want to talk about, shoot us a message over at our email. We're southernfriedgeekery@gmail.com. And we are waiting on you, dear listeners. Just waiting on you. Doing nothing else. Sitting around wondering where you're at. So, come hang out with us. I am really excited this week because I don't have to lead the roundtable. So makes my job incredibly easy. So I'm going to turn things over to Matt.
Wait. Back
Wait a
up. Aren't we
minute.
going to do the short stack first?
Oh crap! I'm not used to this. See, we're going back to the way things were, and now I gotta like back up and make a list and figure things out. So yes, we're gonna do short stacks.
So do we need to pause while you make a list?
No, I got this. No,
Oh,
good.
oh,
I just,
okay.
we haven't done them, and so coronavirus derailed us. So
A little bit, just like the rest of the country.
yeah, I got to figure out how to do this thing again. Go back to podcasting school.
Yeah.
Make a new spreadsheet for everything.
Why though?
I'm gonna send it to you. I'm gonna send you your own spreadsheet, Craig. It's gonna be great.
If you want me to have something to delete, go for it.
I'll send you a second one.
I got a list of things you can delete, Greg.
What, my Michael Bay movies?
Your Michael Bay movies. Your library of digital Michael Bay moving pictures.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of Hammer films lately, so I've moved from Michael Bay to Hammer films.
Are those on your short stack?
No, but you know what is on my short stack?
What's on your short stack, Craig?
First of all, I read Marvel Comics, The Nom, somewhere around 10 issues, starting at issue 11, going to about 20, somewhere in there. I'm just continuing to reread this tale and just love it as much as I did the first time around. Everybody should get these books and read them if you can. Most of them can be found in dollar bins anywhere. In newer books, I read Nailbiter Returns from Image Comics by Joshua Williamson and Mike Henderson. They take us back to Buckaroo, Oregon, where the killings have begun again by another round of serial killers. Did either of you guys read the original Nailbiter?
I did not.
Yeah. I read a lot of it. I don't remember where I dropped off though.
It was one of my favorite kind of horror crime type series. It was, I guess you could put it in horror or crime. I really enjoyed it. It's got kind of a twist because you thought something happened at the end of the first Nailbiter that did not happen. So if you enjoyed that, you should pick this up and start reading what is essentially going to be volume 2 of Nailbiter. And then I also read Postal Deliverance by Brian Hill and Raphael Ianco. This is number 8, also by Image Comics. This had a huge cliffhanger at the end of it, and I just think that's unfair when we haven't had issues for 3 months and we come back to that cliffhanger. Fuck you, Brian Hill.
Hey.
Keep writing great stories.
Get mad at the man for eliciting that kind of emotion out of your dead soul.
Right?
It's trying to repair the damage all those Transformer movies did.
Yeah, right.
It's bad when Matt talks about pulling emotions out.
That's right. So I'll piggyback that. I read that's on my short stack as well, so I'll just transition right into mine. Postal number 8, very, very good. And like what WTF on that last page, man.
Right?
What?
Right.
What?
Yeah.
Brian, you really get the feeling that the story is wrapping up. Man, freaking Brian Hill delivers, man, and Raphael Ianco's art is really, really nice to look at. It's very unique. He's got a very unique style, very detailed and emotive faces in his characters. But WTF on that last page. Also, I read from Dynamite Comics, Red Sonja number 15. Of course, this is by Mark Russell, Bob Q, and Deirdre Kelly. I know you think it's mediocre, Caleb, but I'm still loving this all to pieces. It's transitioned from the consequences of decisions made in war to the aftermath of those decisions in leadership. Mm-hmm. So again, even though it does not feel very Red Sonja-esque as far as the legacy of the character, just as far as first of all, a great story, but second of all, an observation on overall, I guess you would say it's an overall observation on leadership and the decisions made within that, the consequences of. Very, very smart writing. I'm really digging this and looking forward to seeing how it progresses. DC's Suicide Squad #5 is the third thing on my list. Of course, this is Tom Taylor, Bruno Redondo, and Adriano Lucas. Love this issue. I mean, to continue to be astounded, I'm very interested in a Suicide Squad book. The story itself, I mean, this Tom Taylor, or at least in this comic anyway, reminds me a lot of the stuff I've read from Jason Aaron, in which the story is solid, but the compelling reason to read the story is the dialogue between the characters. The dialogue between the characters in Suicide Squad is freaking great. Captain Boomerang shows up. Hilarious. How he writes Captain Boomerang. And I really do continue to appreciate that Harley Quinn does not dominate this book. She's just very minimal. Harley Quinn is very minimal in this story. So a lot of people that I've talked to about picking it up have said, I'm sick of Harley Quinn. Well, so am I. And, I think Tom Taylor maybe is too. So because she's in it, and where she is used is very minimally and very effectively. She's not a chatterbox. She doesn't come across as obnoxious as she at least does to me in so many Harley Quinn representations. So yeah, I highly recommend picking up that one.
Mental note: go back and change my whole comic book of the week for the week. No, I mean it's a Harley Quinn centric book. That's all. I was just being funny.
Well, I read some things this week. So the first thing on my short stack is, I remember a while back we talked about this new publisher, before the world ended, the AWA Upshot.
Yes.
And so I went back and read. They put out something really cool, and I mentioned this when we actually spoke about the book, but they put out something called AWA Upshot Now, and it's like a black and white catalog that contains all of their first issues, or at least their first 4 or 5 issues from the series that they're putting out. And I hadn't read all of them, and I set it to the side just in general. It's like, I'll get to this at some point, but it wasn't high on my priority list because there's just other stuff I had in mind to read first. But I finally got around to browsing through it and checking it out. So I read one of their new titles. It's called Red Border. It's written by Jason Starr, art by the incredible Will Conrad, Ivan Nunes, and I think Craig, did you read this? I think you read this. And,
I did.
I
did. I talked about it on the show a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. It goes in a direction you don't expect it to go. You think it's going to be one thing, it's completely different.
Yeah, it's got a really strong left turn in it that just It was enjoyable. I think this is, out of all of my read, I think this might be my favorite offering. And that's not to discredit any of the other offerings. They were all fine. I enjoyed them all. I think this might just personally be the one I enjoyed the most. It was.
Yeah, I hope that the delay in books doesn't sink AWA, because from what I read, the books I read of theirs, I was really into a handful of them. So yeah, I hope it doesn't sink them.
There's a lot of talent here, and there's a lot of good comics being presented here. And not that I think it's neat that there is a shared universe that's being put out there that is not. It's not like it's a little bit like Valiant, but it's not quite in the Valiant model, and it's not so heavily quote unquote superpowered. I mean, there are superpowered elements to it, but it's more of
all of the stories could exist on their own, though.
Yeah, it's more Punisher Max grit than it is, Avengers, as far as a shared universe goes, and I appreciated that. But I do enjoy my superpowered heroes, and so a while back I started reading a series that I'd been wanting to check out for a long time, because I'm only kind of tangentially connected to the character, but I also love the creative team. and that's the Supergirl run that Gary Frank and Peter David did, and that was just awesome. And so I'm about halfway through the series. I've got them all in singles, but I'm on issue 17 right now. And if you're not familiar with Supergirl, or that's just never been a character that you tapped into and you're looking for a way in, maybe you've been enjoying the series on, I guess it's the CW, but the kind of the Arrowverse idea of the series, I think you'll enjoy. It's not quite as lighthearted, but I really do think you'll enjoy the Peter David Gary Frank run. There's like good comics being told in that story, and it's not Gary Frank that you get in Watchmen, or the not Watchmen, Doomsday Clock. Like, this is a little, obviously this is a little bit of an older, earlier iteration of Gary Frank, but still his lines are just crisp, and it's really pretty. The art is beautiful. So it's been kind of fun to go back and dip into that. And then, last but not least, I picked up a hardcover last week from our local comic shop that features one of my favorite artists from the early Silver Age, and that's Mr. Wally Wood. And this is called Torrid Romance, Classic Archives, with books like The Penthouse, Tormented Men, His Kisses Were Tainted, Dance Hall Girl, I Was a Delinquent. It's put out by Vanguard, and it's just really, really pretty old school romance comics that Wally Wood did. And when it comes to just drawing people in kind of everyday mundane scenes, but also making those mundane scenes sexy as shit, Wally Wood, I don't know that there's anybody who does it better than he did. So it's just nice. And this is it's a large size hardcover. It's weighty, and it's been fun to go back and read those. And fair warning, they read like comics written in that era did. These are not breaking the mold, but it's Wally Wood drawing, and that's the real that's the real thing that should pull you to it. So yeah, if you get a chance.
I don't know if you noticed in our group text, but Matt just asked if he could borrow that when you're done.
I did not notice. Not looking at my phone, but I will make sure he has it.
That's the clearest indication that my phone has been hacked.
You might actually enjoy this, Matt. I mean, these aren't just lovey-dovey, woo-woo stories. It's there's a lot of guilty pleasure in this. There's some naughty happening. So you might.
So you mentioned Gary Frank earlier, and the difference in the art that what you read in Doomsday Clock. He's a very interesting example of something I bring up on the regular, is watching an artist style progress throughout their career. If you go back and look at his early work back in the early 90s and compare it to Doomsday Clock, it in no way looks like the same artist. He grew to leaps and bounds over the years. Really impressive how that guy has progressed as an artist.
Well, and it has, and he's a very fluid artist. And the work that he did in Doomsday Clock is gorgeous, but he's also absolutely aping Gibbons, like purposefully so, because he's trying to make it feel like it's at home with what happened in The Watchmen. So, if you go back and you look at the Supergirl series, or you look at other stuff that he's done, it's not going to be quite that, but it just speaks to his level of talent and how he can channel. And I think I mean channel when I said ape. Like, ape has kind of a bad connotation. It doesn't have to be, but people tend to link it to it. I say ape very respectfully because it's, like, it takes a lot of talent to really get that to shine through. But he's channeling those other artists in really creative and in ways that does not look like he's just lifting them. Extremely. I mean, I don't need to tell anybody that Gary Frank is awesome because they got eyeballs for the most part.
For the most part.
Yeah. I mean, those of us reading comics probably have eyeballs.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
are we
generally.
going to talk about the elephant in the room now?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
I
Thoughts?
mean, do we have to talk about me?
I mean, yeah, I'll lead it off.
Repercussions. What are thoughts on repercussions? I think is really the thing. The choices behind, I think, have already been vetted out. But what do you think the repercussions of DC's move are going to be?
Oh, I thought you were talking about a different elephant in the room.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
me.
To talk, okay, so on what you're talking about, we'll go to the other thing. No, let's go to the other thing first. Let's just get that out of the way. Like, why? Like, I don't think we can do a podcast on pop culture in the world without like noting the fact that our nation and the world we live in is in a
Oh
lot of
man,
turmoil.
I was hoping we would avoid that as much as possible.
Well, and we can because I don't want to bring it down. I just want to say, like, we've put up posts on our Facebook page and Instagram page, and like, we get it. The world is heavy right now. And comics in a large part is escapism from that. But they also, comics as a medium can really tune into the pain that the world delivers to a lot of people. And it's not lost on us that we're three white dudes who do this podcast. But we want the podcast to be a comfort zone and a place that everybody feels welcome and able to raise their voice. So if you are a member, I mean, if you are a person of color, if you're a black person who is really having a hard time with the weight of the world right now, please reach out. We're at a point right now. I think we all acknowledge that as white men need to listen more than we need to talk, but we're also friends who have a pretty high degree of empathy, I think. And so, if anybody is like just needs like an ear, don't hesitate to reach out because the world's fucking heavy. So
Yeah, we hear you, we see you. Tell us what we can do to help.
Yeah. Because the world's on fire and it needs to be better. Everybody's got to do better to get past it. So on to
That's
the
right.
DC thing. To lift it back up a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah.
You think this will lift it back up?
Yeah, that's some heavy lifting.
I mean, from that, yeah, anything's better.
Well, I mean, there is that.
Repercussions, I think they're yet to be seen. Everything that I've, kind of watching this and figuring out how it's all going to play out.
Well, there's no figuring it out. I mean, nobody knows. I'm just curious what your thoughts on the repercussions would be.
I think at first there's going to be a lot of speed bumps because with change, there's always a lot of speed bumps. I think inevitably it's going to get smoothed out. I think that, I think there are a lot of valid worries. I think there are a lot of valid criticisms. I think inevitably they're short term, at least on our end and our side of the world. People, comic shops and retailers, they're going to improvise and they're going to adapt. They may not like it at first, but I think that there are some positives that can come out of it. And I also think that retailers who are concerned have legitimate fears. But the worst repercussions that I've seen, and the ones that I don't know that are going to be as easy to smooth out and are going to be as pertinent. So for people who don't know, DC Comics announced that they are completely separating themselves from Diamond. They're no longer going to be issued through Diamond. They're going through the two other mini distributors, or not mini distributors, the two other distributors that popped up during COVID, which are Lunar and something else with three letters. But if you track them back, they're owned by the same people who own Discount Comic Book Service and Midtown. DC had contacted them during the pandemic when Diamond shut down. They said, hey, can you maybe help us out with moving product because we're not happy with this? And they said, yeah. So they scrambled. They started something up that they didn't know if it was going to be short term or long term, but it landed on the potential for short term. And once they separated from Diamond, a lot of people aren't happy because, of course, we're talking about decades of only having Diamond and only having to deal with one distributor, and people's computer systems and stuff are set up. So they're going to have to flex. They're going to have to shift if they want to keep carrying comics. And what worries me is not necessarily our side of the fence. It's international, because everything I've seen on international, like, there's really concerns about how I'm friends with and see a lot of people who are in the UK and in Australia, and they've got concerns because of it's already hard to get American comics shipped over there, and so they're a little bit worried about that. Um, Everything else, I think once. So here's what's interesting. I've seen a lot of retailers saying that they're just going to fuck DC and fuck those other people. We're going to do the bare minimum, so we're only going to carry things in that people have pre-ordered, and we're going to go minimum on the wall shelf. Well, what that says is you're still, in order to do that, you're going to have to set up the system. You're going to have to set up the ability to get the stuff that people have on pull lists, and you might actually do it bare minimum, but you've got to still set up the system, and you've got to still work with those distributors to do that. And I think what will happen is once they start doing that and they develop a system that works for them, and they develop the ability to get the books that are on pull list, inevitably they'll see that it's a minimum effort to expand that and to bring in the same number of books that they were before. Again, I think it's all short term, like on that end, short term bumps in the road.
Craig?
I feel that you make some valid points. I do think that there's going to be some bumps. How severe they are, I don't know. Change is always scary in business. Sales is going to drive the market ultimately on whether they're going to have them on the wall or not. I mean, no one in retail is not going to carry something that their customer base is asking for. I understand the complaints that the retailers are making, and they're valid. They're valid complaints. Now, 6 months from now, will they still be making those same complaints? I don't know. It's going to depend on how bumpy the road is. Ultimately, is this going to be the death knell for Diamond? That's going to depend on what Marvel comes up with at the end of their contract with them.
Well, I don't see how, based on what we know about Diamond's, I guess you would say, financial struggles, I don't see how this could not be the death knell for that organization without them making some kind of radical organizational change, because the loss of DC is a huge loss of revenue.
Well, yeah.
So how are they going to adjust to that to stay afloat? And I also, reading DC's statement reads to me that part of the driving force to doing this is to increase their exposure in the market outside of the direct market. Mm-hmm. So if that shows to be true, and we start seeing comic books pop up in other places, that is going to drive Marvel to do the same thing. So either directly or indirectly, this spells to be disastrous for Diamond as an operation, unless they make some kind of radical organizational change. That's what's going to be really interesting to me, is to see what this is not the changes this is going to cause DC Comics fans and retailers so much as what kind of waves this is going to make to the entire industry in the exposure of the medium.
Well, we've all agreed in the past that getting comics in more places is what's best for the industry.
Yeah.
And if this ultimately does that, then that's great. I think it's one of those things that really, we can make all the projections we want, but time's going to play it out. But
yeah,
I make no believe that Diamond's sorry, Matt, but I have to believe that Diamond's financial problems and them being unable to pay for the comic books that they already had to play a part in this.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So somebody actually on one of the message boards that I'm a part of for Ryan Higgins' shop out in California made a really good point. And it was, Diamond didn't shut down shooting like comics to the states that stayed open and the shops that were able to stay open because they were necessarily worried about COVID. They shut down because once half the shops in the country stopped being able to get new comics, they could no longer afford to ship out. So there's actually, and I think this may play into why DC is possibly able to get out of its contract and why Marvel may be able to get out as well is that Diamond may actually not be solvent right now. Like
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Diamond might not have the operating capital to get going right now. And that speaks to a point that Matt brought up the last time we kind of talked about this, is Diamond's ability to offer an extensive amount of credit to a lot of stores, stores that may be going through some financial hardships. If your credit lender is no longer financially solvent, then you're done. Like, just that's the end of the game. And so if that is why that they're able to get out of these contracts, then that's terrifying. And it's not necessarily, will that be the death nail for Diamond if Marvel leaves? The death nail might have already been pounded into the casket. So there's going to have to be a shift in the direct market anyway. But we don't know that for sure. It's just speculation. But there's been some weird, like, financial questions.
Well, when Diamond came out and announced that they were going to have to, slowly pay back the books they had, that sort of thing.
Right.
During the entire, and we know a little bit of this because we are friends with a comic book store owner. During the past, month and a half when they weren't releasing new comics, he did not get a bill for that entire time.
No, he didn't.
Even though he's buying trades every week, he's buying what people, because we were all going in there and we're asking for collected editions and things like that to keep him going. And during that time, they didn't invoice him once until they sent out new comics. So luckily he was smart enough to put money aside to pay for that.
Yeah.
But that's not a real great business practice, in my opinion. But
well, it depends on your financial standing. Yeah. I mean, it could be a very good. I mean, if you've got the financial standing to do so, it could be a very good showing of support for your customer base.
It could be, except for then earlier they had said that they couldn't afford to pay their bills.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's a kind of the combination of everything you heard going on during that time. And I have to believe that their financial stability had a lot to do with DC making the decision when they made the decision, because I've heard a lot of criticism, or I should say read a lot of criticism about DC choosing to do it now. I think that it had to do with what was going on.
I can't help but wonder, maybe there's a possibility that this is a negotiation tactic. Cannot help but wonder that too.
Always in the background in business, there's always negotiating that's possible behind the back doors.
Because, this is a radical move to make, a sharp turn like that, because, this is not a phase out. So it's like all of a sudden, all these books that we've got on reserve.
Yeah.
I mean, are we going to get them? When are we going to get them? How are we going to get them?
I knew there was something up last week, the week before, when we got our new previews magazine.
Yeah, and
there was no DC in the previews at all.
Yeah.
Well,
and I thought, wow, that's interesting.
And yes, it's a radical move, but you also have to keep in mind it's the first time they've had an option to make a move in almost 30 years. Like there just wasn't a choice, because DC watched what happened when Marvel, I think it was Marvel, tried to buy their own distributor.
Oh yeah, the Heroes World.
Yeah. And so that's it. Like, yes, it's a radical move. It's also the first opportunity they had to make a move in 3 decades, and with a publisher that, for most of those 3 decades, really until there was another option that presented itself that stemmed from other retailers, everybody in the industry, all the retailer shops, fucking hated Diamond, except for like Brian Hibbs and like 2 other mega retailers, who arguably benefited from the fact that there was only one retailer and they were the large ones, or there was only one distributor, they were the large ones, and they could get really, really good deals that weren't being extended to other shops.
Right.
And so that's like, so yeah, no, I agree. It's a fast move, and it's a shaking move. It doesn't surprise me that once the option presented itself, that like somebody took it, because again, up until recently, Diamond was acid in the mouth for a lot of these people. They were they didn't even have a
I
choice of the lesser of two evils. They just had to take the one evil.
I don't think that anybody's complaining about DC switching distributors. I don't think that's their problem.
Ooh, no, I've seen a lot of people.
Yeah, there's a lot of that actually,
Yeah.
Greg. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you think it's just that they're switching distributors, or to who the distributors are?
It's a mix.
Okay.
What I've seen, it's
Okay.
a mix that they're switching distributors, and that again, I think some of it comes from questions like the ones you ask. Are we going to get the books that we had on reserve? Yada
Right.
yada yada. From the fact that
We'll know this week.
Mm-hmm.
possibly, yeah, and also the idea of the Diamond Portal. That's all they've had to operate on again for 3 decades. Like
They have to change. They have to change the way they order.
right,
But
they'll
that's
have to.
not a bad thing. Maybe they'll start getting their toys more than 3 months after the other companies have got their toys.
Well, and maybe they'll be able to find a new and better system than pre-ordering things 3 months in advance before you know
That's right.
what's going to be in it. So
How
I
it's
think,
going to sell. That's right.
and again, that's where I was saying like I understand why people are up in arms, even if I disagree with them. Like I want to, because I largely do. But even if I disagree with them, I think those fears are valid. But they're also mostly short-term stuff that gets worked out in like literally the first few phases of going into it. And I think once that happens, it gets smoothed out. Because yeah, I mean, learning a new operating software is not easy, but literally 2 or 3 days, you know how to use the new operating software. The POS system.
Well,
Yeah,
learning a new operating software. I mean, I'm not gonna. You're wasting your time complaining about something like that. I mean, that is the
Yeah,
weakest
that's-
complaint to make. And in all this, it's like, bro, really, bro, you want to complain about? Get out.
But I mean,
Here, I mean,
that's been a complaint.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
mean,
person
well-
that's going to complain about the sun rising every day if you got to listen to that complaint.
Well, there's a lot of people that have been in the business for a long time, that are still, the guy, before I moved to Central Arkansas, the guy in Northwest Arkansas I got my comics from, he still did it by hand.
Right.
He still made a list in a notebook,
Mm-hmm.
so that there is that faction that I'm sure is very scared of that. And, I've been in business for a long time, and business is always scared of change. It always costs business money. Now, do they make that money back? Usually, but the initial cost is always there. So, I mean, I understand it. And some of these comic book stores are working on, shoestring budgets as it is.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's their fault or not, that's a debatable. That's another topic, I guess I should say. But change in business is there's always repercussions, good and
Yeah,
bad.
it's going to be fascinating to watch as this unfolds.
It will be.
Given that it's
Absolutely.
not given it's not a negotiation tactic, given that this is actually a thing, it's going to be fascinating to watch how this unfolds.
I think the fact that there wasn't a DC insert in the previews kind of tells me that it's maybe not, though.
Yeah.
No, and one thing I think after all the bumps are smoothed over, you're talking about negotiation tactics. This could very well present the opportunity for comic shops to actually have the ability to negotiate for the first time in forever.
Yeah, again, we don't know all of the quote
Right.
unquote fallout from this. The repercussions from it. So it's going to be ripples for quite some time.
Yep.
And it's going to be fun. I mean, it's going to be, I'm not going to say fun to watch, but it's going to be interesting to watch.
It's also, wouldn't surprise me that given that this is a thing and that DC is using these other distributors, the likelihood that they'll once again bounce and go to a magazine distributor.
I don't know about that. So there's something interesting that I haven't quite figured out in all of this. Penguin Random House plays a role in this somewhere. And I like, because this week has been busy and with the wedding and everything, I actually haven't gotten a chance to sit down and look at as many of the articles and stuff as I want to really educate myself on what's happening. But Penguin Random House plays a role in this, and I actually think that maybe is number one, the potential to solve the UK, like the overseas market. That may be where they're coming into play, but I think it's actually going to be a book distributor, because what you're seeing, I mean, hell, Barnes and Noble just decided they're going to quit selling magazines, period. So I don't know that it's going to be a magazine distributor, but I think they're actually going to get into book distribution and use some of that. Like I said,
Well,
Penguin Random House, like they have hooks in this somewhere, and I haven't quite figured out where it's at. But that to me is the most interesting thing.
That's the part people aren't talking about a whole lot yet. They're all focused on the floppy distribution, and it sounds like the trades. And the flip side of that is that Penguin Random House has their own printing companies as well. So
that'd be great, because that would get comics back into the returnable market.
Yeah,
that's right.
Which means more people are going to be open to ordering them.
Which also means that shops will lose less money.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, overall, I think there are some wrinkles in the road, no doubt. There's some potholes. I think this is overall potentially, if people are smart, if they are guarded, if they do things intelligibly, this is a good thing for the industry. Of course, I don't know that for a fact, but it at least opens the door for a potential for growth in what has been largely a diminishing market since the early 2000s. For the first time, there is a potential for expansion, and that's a good thing. They just you got to be smart about it.
Well, and we also have to remember that in all of this, DC was recently, their parent company was recently purchased by AT&T.
Right.
For a large sum of money. And that company expects a return on their investment. So there's multiple things playing into this. For
sure. I think where they're looking at the return, I mean, because comics are minimal, right? Like the revenue from, I mean, so even on Batman, which is usually the number one selling book, you're only actually selling 100,000, maybe to 150,000 copies. If there's if it's really something supposed to be happening, you might sell 200,000. And so the money coming in from comics, when it comes to even DC, like with Warner Brothers and before you get to AT&T, even at the Warner Brothers level, comics are kind of a nominal blip. I think that companies like that are largely using it for IP factories. Like they're looking at what Marvel has been able to do with Disney, and they're trying to use these books and find a way to let your movie franchise and stuff make money. Now, if they can increase their revenue stream by going towards graphic novels and young adult and stuff, and the actual comics that outside of the direct market that sell gangbusters, then yeah. Like I saw a post.
Well, that's what my point kind of was, is that they're looking for ways to expand their business model,
right,
to get a higher return on their investment in these. Yes, they didn't buy Warner Brothers to get DC, but DC was part of Warner Brothers.
Well, sure, and where I was going with that was when you have such a minimal profit garnering stream, that also can be the first thing to get axed, right? Like they're like, okay, this really isn't doing anything. Although I think the IP factory aspect of it is going to save that. I don't see them axing it at all.
There's too much money to be made in the movies.
Yeah,
and something can be relatively low income, but if it's still profitable, a company is not going to axe it.
Mm-hmm.
Cash flow is a big thing in companies.
Right.
And so a company, as long as they're showing a profit, they're probably not on the line for the most part. Even in a big, they would be more likely to piece that part of the company off and sell it than they would be to axe it.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, isn't that your thought on it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I don't see DC, Marvel, Image going anywhere as far as being, just we wake up one day and their parent companies are like, no, we're not doing that anymore. But I do see that when you're bought by a larger corporation, that they expect a return for their investment.
Yeah. Well, and I know I look at things that even with that, again, don't think it's going to happen, but I look at things a little bit differently in that even if they did, that just opens the door for other comics to be made. Step over the fucking corpse and hold hands with the next thing.
I mean, I'm still going to read comics no matter who's putting them out there as long as they're being put out.
Exactly.
I mean, do I want to see Batman die though? No.
No, I don't want that, but we're like hypothetical Earth 4 weird world example, like nuclear option world where that happens, doesn't mean like you're walking away from sequential art, because comics is a medium, not a brand.
That's right.
Fuck it, you find the Josh Bayers of the world. You read more stuff by Marco Tamaki that's not being done by that by Marvel. You look at the work, like Image isn't going to go away. You look at Jeff Lemire's and the Matt Kent's and all of those people who are doing incredible, like not quite underground comics, but doing really great indie comics work. Like look at the Vault companies, Boom Studios, like all that shit. If Marvel and the big two collapsed, if superhero comics collapsed, that might actually
won't happen.
No, it's not. Again,
happen,
I'm talking about Earth 4. Earth 4,
which won't happen. Which won't happen.
Yeah, right. Which won't happen.
Quick, just stop.
Yeah.
But it opens the door for other
now we're living in the world where everybody gets a pony, Caleb. Not going to happen.
What kind of pony?
Yeah.
The pretty
doesn't matter.
Pony.
Doesn't matter. You don't get it. Not going to get it. Sorry.
Well, all right. Are y'all ready to talk about some actual comics? Like we've talked about the world.
I suppose.
I read funny books, and I want to talk about them before the Earth 4 monster eats it.
Not going to happen either.
Hey, Matt, why don't you tell us about a really funny book that we all read?
So, from a roundtable is from Dynamite. This is the part where Caleb gives a spoiler warning. So, spoiler warning, looking forward, potatoes, meat, so on.
That was beautifully done, my friend. Beautifully done.
So, The Boys, Dear Becky, #1. This is a continuation from the previously published Garth Ennis series. It was Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson series that was done years ago that I enjoyed very much. It's one of my favorite stories ever. Not to say it's not without its faults. It's not. Certainly, I'm not putting it up there as the perfect story. I just really appreciated what the overall story did and what it was illustrating. And I think a point, and for those of you that aren't familiar, The Boys is about a small group, 4 or 5 individuals, essentially contract with the CIA. They're pharmaceutically enhanced, and their job is to keep misbehaving superpowered beings in check. In the boys' world, superpowered human beings act like spoiled celebrities. That's essentially what they are. And a lot of them misbehave and spend their time doing drugs and all kinds of debaucherous behavior. Their low moral character actually comes out because they can do things with no repercussions. They're superpowered beings, so they don't have to answer to the judicial system by and large.
It's
right,
like
who's going to arrest them?
Correct. It's like Jeffrey Epstein with a cape.
No, not so much. No. But so God, that was dark. Jesus Christ. So this continuation specifically revolves around obviously Huey. Huey was the main protagonist in the original The Boys series. Second to him, Billy Butcher. Billy Butcher is my favorite character in the Boys series. Amazing character. And in this issue, we see where Huey, being from Scotland, goes back to Scotland to marry his girlfriend named Annie. And a lot of the issue takes place where Huey is sitting in a pub with an old buddy of his who happens to be transgender. And they're talking about the state of things right now. And, the term woke is dropped a lot. And the views and experiences of transgender folk. Outside of that, we learn that Huey has recently received in the mail a diary or a journal, whatever you want to call it. And as he's sitting on the toilet, he opens it up for the first time, reads through it, realized this is a journal from Billy Butcher. And it's recounting somewhat, I guess you would say, the early days of the Boys experience, where Billy Butcher has assembled the team and has started going after misbehaving super beings.
Right.
And, this was the impetus of the Boys story, and him doing this was the death of Billy Butcher's fiance.
Right.
That's the impetus of putting the whole story into motion. And this issue seems to spell out that we're going to get a lot more backstory on how he handled that emotionally. And
yes,
essentially talks about the way he can do these things that he knows that his fiance would be very disappointed in him in doing, these violent acts. He's essentially saying he's going to have to kill off her memory in order to do these things, because the backstory of Billy Butcher was that he was a rowdy, angry drunk. He was a very violent person, constantly getting into violent confrontations that he would instigate. And his fiance, when he met her, really turned him around and forced him to clean up his act. He totally quit drinking, and she enriched his life more than any other person. And the death of her sent him in a spiral. He did not return to booze, but he did embrace violence in a very, very brutal way. But knowing she was against all that, he's having to kill off her memory, is what this issue is setting up. So where this is going to lead, I'm really looking forward to this, mostly because I'm so very interested in the Billy Butcher character, more so than the story of the Boys has been told, and it had a very, very finite ending, very satisfactory ending, I might say. It's one of my favorite endings in any comic book story I've ever read.
I enjoyed this story, actually. It was an interesting journey for somebody that hasn't finished The Boys, but I know the premise of it, and I know, not quite the ending, but I know the premise of it again. It was interesting. I enjoyed it, actually.
I wasn't in, no, so I once I got past the first few pages, and we got into the memory aspects of it. I think there's some really neat work being done there. I'm not in love with it, but I'm also not in love with the Boys. If that, so it's, I think it's fine. I don't have anything. I have some. Let me back up. I have some issues with the first few pages, but I also have those issues with the fact that I don't think it's supposed to make anybody look good. It's supposed to look like what it actually looks like, which is an ignorant person saying ignorant shit that gets away with it for some reason, because that's actually what happens in the real world. But I don't think anything was wrong with it, and I do like the idea of returning to that world this way. Russ Braun he's a beautiful artist, but again, I think that Russ Braun is trying to channel Derek Robinson instead of just being Russ Braun. Like I've looked at other, and I had a list written down with a sticky note somewhere that went away because I did it 2 days ago. With some other stuff that I've seen Russ Braun do, he's a very talented, very competent artist. But it didn't like his true. This didn't
I don't think that's
necessarily
fair
feel
at
like-
all because he's got to draw the characters as Derek Robertson designed them.
Yeah, no.
I mean, that's what he has to do.
Yeah, no, he does, and he tries that. I don't necessarily think he's ultimately successful in that.
I totally disagree with that.
And that's fair.
I
mean, like
disagree
said,
as well.
It's subjective. I just don't think
No.
that it feels like it feels like it's coming off as a copy. Like I said, it's not, and there's nothing bad about it. I don't look at it and go, oh, that's like I can't look at that. It's not burning my eyes by any means.
I don't know. I think calling it a failure is calling it bad.
No, I didn't. I don't know that I called it a failure. I think he failed in the
That there. You just said it.
right. Well, yeah, because I'm qualifying it. I think he failed in trying to do a 1-to-1 comparison, whereas I think he would have been more successful if he had have just used his own style. Because I mean, we've seen that you can use your own style to still deliver the same character designs. Like you can still notice it. I mean, we've like how many styles has literally every thing in Marvel and DC been done in, and you don't have a problem translating those. I will say that this does look like an older version of the person that Huey's based off in real life. I think he aged that character well. I think this is just a matter of, it's coming through a secondary source. It's Derek Robinson by way of Russ Braun, and I wasn't necessarily in love with it. I don't hate it by any means. I'm just not in love with it.
Yeah. Did Russ Braun not draw some of the boys?
I don't believe he did any of the offshoots. No, John McCrae did some because there were some.
I think he did some of it. The
Did he?
original run. I think so.
He may have. I mean, him and Garth Ennis have worked together on several things throughout the years, and he may have done a handful of issues. And I just don't.
I mean, I
recall
don't think he was a long running artist on it, but I think he did some of it.
Yeah, no, nobody was long running. Derek Robertson did the vast majority. I only remember John McCrae is the only standout to me that did anything in the series that Robertson did. And of course, Robertson, because there were several where the instances where the main story stopped and then, some side stories kicked in. They did some backstory on Huey, did a backstory on a few of the other characters. There was Hero-gasm. I love that title. But even Derek Robertson did most of those.
So Russ Braun is credited on 25 issues of The Boys. He did a lot of the covers.
Okay.
So he did covers on like issue 30.
Were they variants or the main covers?
I'm looking at some interior art he did as well.
Okay.
So I think issue 44, which was the Believe, he may have done that. So yeah, he did some work on it.
Yeah.
But,
so what is it now? Now, Craig, you did not finish the series, and Caleb,
I did not
you did
finish the original Boys, so
Right.
it's hard for me. This I look at this story in and of itself, and I enjoyed it. I mean, he's meant to look despicable, but that's pretty much what the Boys are.
Oh, yeah. Well, to some degree, yeah. So you didn't finish it, and Caleb, you didn't love it. So I'll start with you, Craig. Why did you why did you drop off?
I just dropped off because I've got so much to read. I will eventually get back to it. It just wasn't really. To be honest, I read through where the story ended on the show, and so before the next season picks up, I'll probably read some more. I think I got the first 3 trades read.
Caleb.
Yeah.
So 22, 23-year-old Caleb loved The Boys. I came to The Boys after reading Preacher, and I adore Preacher. It's one of my it's a beloved series to me. And so I came to the boys after I had read Preacher, and I dug it when I was that age, and within 10, that was 10 years ago, and having read it now, completely different person than I was back then. I mean, literally, like my life is 180-degree different direction than it was then. I tried to reread the series when the television show was coming out. And as I was reading it, I just in a way different place in life, and I don't find the quote unquote edgelordness of it to be entertaining anymore. And maybe that's just because, for me, 10 years of living in a conservative state, being a gay dude, I don't need the cynicism to be humorous. And so I just, not saying it shouldn't be written. I don't think that's on anybody to say. I'm not in a place in life where I find that to be enjoyable, or I need that explained to me. Even if it's to make a character look despicable, there's just other stuff I can read. And so I like, as I was rereading it, I was just like, yeah, I'm not in a place where I can read this right now. I don't need this. And I think, honestly, the show translate, and again, because the world changes, right? I think the show translated it for the Caleb that's alive in 2020 in a way that I could appreciate it, the television show, in a way that I can't appreciate it reading the book. And I think that's because the book is more raw. The book is like, there's the book is more grating. And I think that's purposefully than what the television show was. And again, I was cool with that when I was younger. I was cool with that when I first read it at, like I said, I think I was 23 or 24. Not necessarily in a place I want to read that now. But that's just where I'm at in life, and that's by no way a commentary on the quality of that series. That's just me.
But what did you take away from as the overall value of the story?
This issue, or the overall value of the boys?
The boys, the overall issue of the series.
That damaged people still have the capacity for good, and that largely the less shitty version of of shitty people can overcome. I think there's a good message there, but again, you look at some of the, I think the first few pages of this are a good example. I read the first few pages of Dear Becky, and I'm like, oh yeah, like this is exactly why I put that book down when I tried to read it 2 years ago. Are they going to do good things? Yes. Are they ultimately good people? Yes. Are they ultimately fighting for a better world? Yes. But like there is this almost like, and I'm going to use this word, and I don't necessarily think this is the right word for it, but I can't come up with a better one right now. There's almost this libertarian, I know how the world really works aspect. Let me tell you how it really is. Fuck your feelings. Here's the harsh reality. I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off because you need to know the world, which I think is a largely bullshit way to view the world. And that usually comes from people who think that they know better when they haven't lived the lives of, in this case, minority communities. And so it wasn't.
So here's what I took away from the boys originally, and why I appreciate it so much. One, it fully displays the abuse of power, which is a theme that I really appreciate, simply because I'm very anti-authoritative in my real life. I don't trust people that have power, period. So this really strikes that chord, obviously. Secondly, the protagonist, being Billy Butcher, he's not trying to do good things. And the point of the story is he is manipulating everybody around him to get revenge for his girlfriend's death.
Mm-hmm.
And if he does, quote, good things on that path, it just happens to happen. He doesn't want to, tear down or sometimes kill superpowered beings because they're misbehaving. That's his excuse.
No, he's
for
got
getting
personal
revenge.
motivation out of the deal.
You know, and he's, you know, so there's a lot more going on there than what's going on the surface. And the people that are also on the boys' team don't realize who he really is. They don't understand his real motivation and why he's doing these things. Huey, you know, is the one that starts to figure it out. But they're, you know, and there's some very, the boys has got some standalone issues in it with some standalone panels that are just some of the most amazing things I've ever read. When he storms the room to attack Jupiter Jack, did you get to that issue, Craig?
I did not. I did not make it that far, no.
That is an amazing scene. I reread that page over and over and over. There, you know, of course, the 9/11 scene is incredible. That's a hugely powerful scene. And they touched on it on the show, but they watered it down, man. Did they ever water it down? You know, that puts on display the Lamplighters' view of the world in such a perfect way. You really get an excellent view of his view of the world. Not to mention a perfect view of the incompetence of what a superpowered being is in this world. But also overall, given that, you know, what this old story does overall as well, that I think a lot of people miss, is it really brings out the value in the character of Superman. You know, it really brings out the value in the character of Captain America. That, you know, these superpowered beings that actually are good people, why they really do have a valuable place in this fictional universe, and why they actually are special.
Yeah, and I number one, I wholly agree with that statement. But as far as me reading the book, I also read that with the backdrop of, you know, something that you made a really great point of making last week, that Garth Ennis fucking hates those characters.
No. I never said he hates character. He thinks they're silly. Pat Mills is the one that hates superheroes. Garth Ennis just thinks they're silly. He hates, what I said last week is he hates when people introduce that stuff to war comics.
Well, yeah, like you said, when we were having that conversation, he thinks that Captain America is the most bastardized abomination that's ever touched comics. And that's not a direct quote. That's pretty close to a direct quote. But, you know, like he has that, he doesn't like that. And he hates superheroes, period. So he doesn't believe in a world.
He doesn't hate them. He openly says, I do not, people think I hate superheroes. He's like, they're misreading me. I just think they're kind of silly. Those are his words.
Right. I think he hates them. I think that's a.
But then you're disregarding his own words. You're calling him. I mean, either he doesn't hate him or he's a liar. I
think Garth Ennis is a smart man, and I think that he also wants to keep writing comics and making money in those characters.
You're not paying attention then, brother. Sorry, because he's not. I mean, he has said multiple times he doesn't enjoy writing them because he just doesn't get much out of them. Right. You know, and
he likes the paycheck. So,
well, how many Batman stories have you read from him recently? Garth Ennis could write whatever he wants to because of who he is. It's not a coincidence he's not writing Superman or Batman or Green Lantern. He has no interest in it.
Yeah,
it's not because if he wanted just a paycheck, he'd be writing those stories all the time. You know,
they won't let him tell the stories he wants to tell, which is why he doesn't. So he'll do stories like the Platoon for Marvel. You know, which is in many ways it's a war story. He Trojan horses it a lot. He gets the stories that he wants to tell into the Marvel and DC universe by cloaking them in these other characters, which is, I think, is, you know, Billy Butcher, I think, is honestly, in many ways, he's a more extreme version of Frank Castle. You know, I think there's a lot of, you know, it's not a perfect circle, but there's a lot of overlap between those two characters. And at least how he writes them. I mean, they're both, they're not trying to do, they're not altruistic, either one of them. They're not trying to be a star-spangled person. They're largely
Billy Butcher's English, so he wouldn't.
Do what?
Billy Butcher is English, so that doesn't apply. Star Spangled doesn't apply.
No, but I mean, they're both characters who they started on the path that they started on by personal motivation of death in their own life, and they're out for just completely unadulterated like destruction and carnage. And if they happen to, I think if they happen to do some good along the way, then great, in the writer's mind. But that's not their end game. Like they're not trying to throw out any measure of equity or build a platform for future justice. They're trying to, in their own minds, right some wrongs by some that have been committed by just abhorrent people. And I just, on some level, I don't know anymore. I don't know that I enjoy those stories.
I'll never get tired of them.
I think because
Myself.
I live, and I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I think the real world is a really shitty, dark place, and the real world is turning me into a very cynical person in real life. And so I don't want that in my stories. And I think that is more and more why I lean towards like the OGNs and the graphic novels that I read that have a more human point to them. Even if that human point is not necessarily feel good and all sunshine and rainbows, I think it gets down to something a little bit that I can walk away from and feel something besides cynicism and depression. I'm not in a place where I look for that in my art or in my artistic entertainment anymore.
You don't look for depression in your entertainment. Yeah.
I mean, it's fair. It's fair. That's a fair statement.
So you don't remember how far you got into the series, Craig?
I don't remember where it ended, where I was reading. So unfortunately, I guess I should have looked that up before the show. But no, I did not. I like I said, I think it was 3 trades in. So I saw both of the airplane issues. I read both of those.
Yeah.
Exactly where it ended, I don't remember. But I didn't feel like there was anything in the show. When I watched the show, I didn't go, oh, I don't really remember, the ending of it, of course, but for the most part, I'd seen most of what was in the show. So yeah, I mean, it didn't, it mostly for me, it just had to come down with to reading time, the amount of time I had in the week to read. And I just didn't have the time to squeeze it in any longer. So, but I have changed my viewpoint going forward that I'm going to dedicate extra time for reading trades, collecteds, and OGNs. So hopefully I will get back on it. And, I think it's one of those series that comic fans should have at least attempted to read. There's series out there that every comic fan should attempt to read, and I think this is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's extreme. So when you have something extreme, that means it's not for everybody. And this is a series that's but that's most of the things that I enjoy the most are the things that are not for everybody. Example, my favorite type of music.
Did you ever read Transmetropolitan?
No, that's one of those things that have just not come across my table yet. And I'll tell you why. It's just the sheer volume of the material. I've just not dedicated myself. Of course, I read prose when I'm not reading comics. So for me to dedicate myself to a volume like that, I'd have to put down all the prose books that I've been reading for the past several years. And I'll get to that point eventually. I just haven't.
Gotcha.
If someone were to try to read The Boys and they feel kind of the same way that I felt trying to reread The Boys, I will say that I find Preacher to be there's a lot of overlap between the tone and some of the messaging of Preacher and The Boys, but I find Preacher to be a lot more digestible than The Boys is.
Oh yeah, yeah.
If you're wanting those same Garth Ennis bullet points and some of the same Garth Ennis's pontification on the world, you're going to get that in Preacher in a way that is part of me wants to say less insensitive, but that makes me feel like I'm a bitch for saying that. But it's it's
No,
more,
it's what your feelings are your feelings,
yeah.
Caleb. And as Matt said, that's an extreme book. And if you don't dig it, you don't dig it for whatever reason. When you're talking about extreme art, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I think it's more thoughtful. Preacher is more thoughtful than the boys. I think there's more introspection in Preacher than there is the boys.
It's interesting that you say that, because I can imagine a group of people would find it much less palatable than the boys.
Yeah. Oh well, sure.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Depending on where your stances in the world are.
Oh, if you're a dyed in the wool mass going weekly mass going Catholic, no, you're not going to read Preacher and walk away with.
But you would be okay.
Same.
But a lot of those people would be perfectly okay with the violence shown in the boys.
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
I think that it's two different forms to get, as you said, that same cynicism that he has on the world out there.
Well, and that's part of why Garth Ennis is one of the best writers in comics. Today. I think if I were to make out like a top 10 list, I would put Garth Ennis in there, easily. And it's because he can take his writings and take those points and put them in different vehicles to deliver them to different locations, and not everybody can do that.
I mean, and that's fair. And like, excuse me, art is subjective. We say that all the time. Different people are going to enjoy different forms of even the same art.
Well, Craig, brother, why don't you tell us what you read this week?
Yep. I did not read something quite as dark. I read
That's easy.
Yeah, right. I read Birds of Prey, which was a DC Black Label book. It's one volume. They could come back later and write another volume to it, no problem. But within itself, it is a contained story. It's written by Brian Azzarello, pencils by Emanuela Lupacino, inks by Ray McCarthy, and colors by Trish Mulvihill and John Calise. So this book starts with Dinah getting a phone call from an ex-fling that she had in the middle of the night. This guy was a operative, the same as her, and he's calling to let her know that he won't ever see her again. And was all of it made up in his mind? Everything they had made up in his mind. So she gets off the phone with him, and the next morning, Steve Trevor reaches out to her. She meets him for breakfast, and he proceeds to tell her that they found Eric, the guy that reached out to her, dead. And so she starts contemplating her retirement, because she has gotten completely out of superheroing and being an operative and is just now in a band. In the meantime, we have Harley sitting on a bus struggling with her sanity after unexpectedly being released from her duties in the Suicide Squad. Something has changed in her, and while she knows she can never be good, she believes she can help with the troubles in Gotham. Then you have Renee Montoya reaching out to Huntress to have her take care of a drug problem in Gotham that the police cannot touch because the feds have asked them to stay out of it. So Harley ends up in a bar where Joker's henchmen show up, and they've been instructed to return her to the Joker. Well, of course, Harley isn't going, and she, proceeds to beat these men something fierce, and then is walking down the street having a conversation with her personal psychiatrist, Harleen Quinzel, who she visits regularly within her compact mirror. And they decide that it would be best for Harley to take on a life of being good. And just as she's deciding this, a head falls from the apartments above her, a severed head landing at her feet. And she thinks, this might be a good place to start. So she enters the building, finds the group of people that are the obvious quote-unquote bad guys that just severed this head, and she proceeds to beat them terribly with the dismembered head. And what she doesn't know is that the man's head that she is carrying is the drug dealer that Renee asked Huntress to look into. So Huntress is watching from across the building, across the street, in the building across the street, and sees Harley get pushed out the windows and decides she's got to save her. So back at back at Harley's hideout, Huntress, Harley, and Renee are, kind of debating whether Harley is actually a good person or not now, when Joker's henchmen return again. And Huntress says, well, I thought this was a hideout. And Harley says, I never said it was secret. And Joker proceeds to show up and launch a rocket launcher into the hideout and blows it up. They escape through the sewers. And in the meantime, Dinah's finding out that her bandmate has overdosed. She decides that she's going to get back in the game and help Trevor find this drug dealer. Well, it turns out all four of them are working on the same crime, of course. And she meets up with Helena and Harley. And after sorting out why Harley is there, Canary gets a phone call from Trevor telling her that Renee is actually the dirty cop that's been giving information to the drug dealers. And I'm not going to tell you how it ends from there, but I will tell you there is a fantastic confrontation later between Harley and the Joker. If you liked the latest Harley Quinn movie, what was it, Harley Quinn and Birds of Prey?
Yeah,
that you're gonna love this story. It very much has that same feel. It's drawn real well, the colored well, the art's great, but the story is just a lot of fun. And Brian Azzarello just has a way of writing stories that I enjoy for the most part.
I'm gonna have to check this out then, because when I first saw it, I didn't know that I wondered what the tone was going to be like, and if it was going to have, because Brian Azzarello is another one of those writers who he can shift his perspective and moods really well, and so you never know if you're going to get like Brian Azzarello from the Joker book that he did, or if you're going to get just a completely different version of that. And so this sounds like a story I might actually enjoy, because I loved the Harley Quinn movie. I think it was wonderful.
Yeah, this is less centric on Harley and more on all of them.
Right.
So it focuses more equally on all of them. Don't get me wrong, Harley is still the comedic relief throughout the thing.
Sure.
But, which is what you use her for, is to break the tension. But the scene with Harley and Joker is just fantastic. And they never show Joker's face in the entire wow. It's him because you see his coat, jacket, she's talking to him. But yeah, it's always implied, and you never see his face. It's really good.
Yeah, Azzarello writing Joker's pretty damn compelling for me personally.
Yeah,
and he doesn't have a huge part in this, other than he's, he knows that she's no longer part of Suicide Squad, and he wants her to return, but she's moved on.
Well, no. So, and since we're on the topic of the films and everything, that's what I wanted from the Well, I mean, I wanted a lot more than what I got from the Suicide Squad movie. But like that idea of keeping him, like having the Joker be a part of it because Harley's there,
right?
But having him be just off the screen, that's what I wanted.
That's right.
Like that's like just makes it even more maniacal.
Yeah. And Azzarello writes both Harley and Joker really well, in my opinion. And, you don't get, again, you're not getting a lot of him, but it's just enough. It's just enough in what it should be. It's the final scene, so I'm not going to tell you too much about it, but it really is a compelling kind of, because like I said, you've got this, crime that they're all working on together. I'm not going to tell you if Renee's really a dirty cop or not, or what's going on there. but they're all working this crime together. So this is getting solved in the background while you've got all this other little stuff. And Dinah trying to figure out what she's doing with her life, trying to be in a band. Her bandmate dies because Dinah decides to go on a date instead of going to deal with her drug addict drummer. Tells her she'll be there in a few hours if she's really serious, and when she shows up, she's dead. So, dealing with some pretty heavy things, which you don't always see, but I guess that's what the black label's for, to allow those things to be shown a little bit darker.
Speaking of that, Craig, and forgive me if you said this earlier and I missed it. Is this in like the big magazine size format?
No, it is not. It's actually in a trade paperback size.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how many pages it is, but I would say it's probably the equivalent to 4 or 5 comics. It's an entire story arc. And I don't know if they did that because of the fact that, we hadn't been getting comics for a while and they just put it all together, or if that was always the intention. So, yeah, I had a lot of fun with it, but I did like the Birds of Prey movie. So, if you like that, I'm sure you're going to like this book.
The spoiler for that movie, but the cocaine scene is one of the funniest goddamn things I saw last year.
Yeah, that movie in and of itself was just fun.
I don't understand people who didn't like it. And that's weird because in many ways it's a comedy. Y'all know me, I'm a sociopath, and I don't understand funny things. And I cracked up in that movie.
Real quick, because I haven't watched it yet. Real quick, what did you think about Old Boy's depiction of Black Mask?
I thought he was great, to be quite honest.
Because the trailers made it look like he's like depicting him as a criminal party guy.
He's not. He's not a criminal party guy. He's not.
Okay.
He's not playing the Godfather per se, but he's not necessarily like a criminal bro dude. He's maniacal. I would say he's a mid-level boss. Yeah. He does have a sense of humor, but he is also
completely out of his mind.
Yeah, he's very.
Oh, that sucks.
He's very well. He's not completely out of his mind in that he is not he's not the Joker by any means. He's not
right.
He's insane, but he's insane. He's direct insane. He's insane with a mission, and he's very calculating.
Yeah, I thought it was good, but I don't have a lot of love for Black Mask one way or the other. When he needed to wear the mask, he wore the mask, so that was impressive enough. And Ewan McGregor's a great actor, so
yeah,
he's not the Black Mask that you would get from the Arkham video games, but there's some of that in his genetic makeup, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I guess I'll watch it eventually.
And when I say he's insane, I don't mean he's not insane and clinically insane where he's the Joker. He's more he's not just going to randomly shoot somebody in a crowd.
Eccentric, I think, is a better word for him.
Eccentric is a very good word. Yeah.
Yeah. He's very eccentric. He's kind of flighty, I think, almost.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's good though. It's better than you think.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll make it across my screen at one point.
We haven't sold it to him, Caleb.
Well, it's
certainly not for everybody.
So I think Craig watching all the Transformers movie really made Matt doubt Craig's taste in film.
Okay, I won't deny that since Caleb put that out there, Craig. I'm sorry.
I never said I liked them.
I cannot.
I said I watched them.
Yeah, I mean, one crime equals another.
Hey, Matt, do you read every comic book you buy?
Of course.
Even if it's good or bad? You finish it, you read it?
Well, I can't say it's bad if I don't finish it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I bought the Transformer movies, so what's that?
Yeah.
I mean, I should do it.
One bad decision doesn't excuse another. 2 wrongs don't make a right. You can't wash your hands. You can't wash your bloody hands with more blood.
Yes, you can.
See, this is why we're at a stalemate here.
Well, I got a book that I think both of you are going to like if you get a chance to read it.
All right.
And so I want to preface this. So in his short stack, Matt made a comment about, I forget what exactly word you used, but essentially I think the new Red Sonja book has been less than what I wanted from it. But he enjoys it because it is steeped in like military strategy. And so there is a book. It's actually a trilogy of books. There's three of them that were Matt to read them and were Craig to read them, both with their love of history and with depictions of military strategy. I think you guys would be just over the moon with. And I told you a little bit about them a couple of months ago because the first one was in my short stack, but I never really dived into it on the show, and I wanted to. And so that book is The Battle from Europe Comics. This book is it takes place in 1809. Napoleon's army is they are at the border of Austria. They're at the Danube River, and they are getting ready to go over into Vienna and sack it. And this is going to be a crushing blow to the Austrians, right? So, but the Danube it's kind of hard to get an army across there, and the Austrians have burned the bridges. So that's a little bit of where the story's at. Now, this is actually based on a novel. It's based on a book by Patrick Rambaud, Rambaud. It was adapted by Frederic Richard. The art is by Ivan Gill, with the colors by Albertine Relenti. And this is a bande dessinée. This is a French comic. And so you get kind of like when I say that French comics kind of they come with their own style. So if you're familiar with them, it's that really hyper detailed, almost an impressionist painting.
Looks more like an illustrator than a
right.
So it's an illustrator is what it is.
Right. Very, very detailed. Almost almost to the point of some of the early cartoons that came from Europe, that came from maybe even Japan. I'm trying to think of some of the ones I'm thinking about, like the Princess. No, not Princess Mononoke, but the whatever that fucking cartoon was with a little girl who rode the broomstick around that was really popular. Like it's got that level of detail in it, and so like that it's just stunning. But this takes like the actual notes and the actual history of this movement and brings it to a comic in a way that's really phenomenal. So, like I said, Napoleon's army is like they're gathered on the banks of the Danube and they're getting ready to go across. And so Napoleon has ordered his sappers to start building a bridge. And what they're using is these old boats that they've salvaged to build a bridge across. And this thing, I mean, it's got to be sturdy, right? Like they've got to get an army across this. And so while that's happening, his army is in this little town just on the French side, and they've taken over, like they've occupied it, and they're looting. It's completely down to martial law, and this is not a time when they were being watched very well, right? Like this wasn't a time where they were really obeying any rules of law. I mean, there's raping and pillaging happening of this little town, in this little town called Essing, and the story kind of centers around one of Napoleon's colonels. He's one of the main figures in this, and he's a genuinely good dude for the most part, right? Like, if you ignore the fact that he's an agent of imperialism, he's not so bad. And his name's Louis Francois, and he is, he's led, helping to lead part of this army there. One of the issues that they're facing throughout this whole story, though, is the supply chains have not quite caught up with them yet. So that's one of the reasons that it's taking longer to get across this village. And so while they're waiting on the supply chain to catch up with them so they can get things like, uniforms and black powder and musket bullets and just rations, the soldiers have gotten antsy and they're starting to just really take it out on this small village. But while this is all happening, Louis Francois he's kind of commandeered this house for himself, and while he's waiting, he's turned it into kind of a command center, and he goes and he is being a man about town one afternoon, and he finds an old friend, this old friend named Henry, who is he works for the French. He kind of is a bookkeeper for them, and also an amateur historian, and they know each other from way back. So he's like, hey, come over to this house I've commandeered. Let's have lunch, and I need to show you something. I also have a favor that I want to ask you. And so they go back to the house, and they walk upstairs, and they come into the bed chamber, and Louise Francois has got this gorgeous Austrian woman there with him, and her name is Miss Kraus, and he's smitten with her. He's absolutely in love, but he also knows that he's about to go into, like, he's about to march into the shit, and he doesn't want what's happening to the rest of this little town of Essing to happen to to Miss Kraus, to the woman he loves. So he enlists Henry or Henri to kind of stay in this house, use it as his office, and keep an eye on Miss Kraus while he's gone. And there's a certain level of luxury and lavishness about this that really entices Henri to sign up and agree to it. So they're going to. Louise Francois leaves Miss Kraus in the capable hands of Henri, and he goes back towards the front lines. While he's doing that, he comes upon a couple of soldiers who are engaging in some bad activities, some bad actors, if you will, and he kind of stops them. And it plays a role into how his feelings towards Miss Kraus gets into. But he's asked one of his his trusted soldiers to kind of guard the area, and they're getting ready to break into his house, and they just kind of go ahead and they bust some heads, which puts him in kind of a bad place with some of the men on the ground, right? Like they don't appreciate this. They don't understand why this house is off limits just because he wants to. There's they see a little bit of a classist action happening here, and so they leave it alone for the time being. But they are biding their time, so to speak. He goes back to the front lines, and when he gets to the front lines, he meets another gentleman who is just kind of a rank and file guy. But he's known him from other battles, and this guy he's kind of a sharp eye. He's going to make a great scout, and so he enlists his services to be a scout. He's going to make him his own personal kind of battle gopher, if that makes sense. He's like, hey, while this shit is going down, I need you to be my eye and you to report back to me. But the problem is this dude is still wearing the uniform of a frontline guy. He doesn't have the uniform of a scout because the supply chains haven't caught up there, and everybody's looking on him and they're like, no, dude, he's in the wrong spot. You need to get him out of here. Go away. And he keeps telling him, well, he's going to get the right uniform. He's going to get the right uniform. And then he kind of sends him off on a mission that's going to play heavily into the second book, and part of the battle. Now, about this time, of course, who shows up but none other than the Emperor, Mr. Napoleon himself. Who is really well depicted. If you've ever read much writings on the personification of Napoleon, he is this little short guy, but he's also a brilliant strategist with no empathy whatsoever. His soldiers are a means to an end for him. They are pawns on a chessboard.
Ooh, I've got some very serious problems with that statement.
Okay. His goal is imperial. Like he's spreading the empire, and so part of this battle, part of the thing is that he knows he's going to lose numbers here, but he is playing the numbers game. This is very much like we're going to cross right here, and you're going to have to scramble over bodies. And he loves his generals. That comes across really well here. Like he loves and trusts his generals as in a way of what they are, but he is not necessarily as concerned. He puts on a good front, but he's not necessarily as concerned that and he'll let his men know, some of you aren't coming back from this, but this is for the good of the empire. He's absolutely we're doing this for the good of the empire, and your sacrifice is duly noted. Appreciate it, bruh. Generals don't fail me. That's the way he comes off in here. And I've read him come off I've read him that way in other stuff as well. There's obviously different takes, but he gets everybody where he wants them. They get the bridge built, but the Austrians aren't a force to be fucked with either. They have diminished their manpower in Vienna because they have sent them on kind of a flanking mission, because they understand the strategy that is at play here, and the Austrians send boats filled with stones down this river that completely break up the bridge. And so Jean-Francois, being kind of over these sappers, has to very quickly jump in and have his men start just ripping down the forest to build these rafts to replace it, which kind of it diminishes the amount of people that can get across at one time. And so they have to shift their strategy. Now, inevitably in this book, because this book is like you got to have some action, it's not just strategizing, the battle does take place. And the battle in and of itself is really where Ivan Gill shines. There are some gorgeous, like I'm talking high art level depictions of Napoleonic warfare, of the horses, of the bayonets, of the swords that are being used, of the death and destruction that is at play here, and the brutality of war at this time. It's so impeccably well done. I mean, you could imagine these paintings and these drawings, blown up and hung in museums across the world. It's that good. And Albertine Relenti plays a big role in that, in his colors and making that shine through. And War is Hell. Those bad actors that I was talking about earlier that Jean-Louis Francois pissed off, they try to sabotage the battlefield to get him killed. So there's people coming at all sides. So there's two levels of warfare at play that is really well balanced in this book by I'm sure the original writer, I haven't read the novel, but Frederick Richard really balances it well in showing that, here's your 30,000 foot view of Napoleon's army marching in to sack Austria. Here's also the personal level emotions at play with people who are on the same side. The maneuvers, the strategies that they lay out and that's where I really think Matt will like it, because this is, and again, it's a different style of book, but I personally enjoy this book, and it's unfair of me, I will say, to make a one-to-one comparison. But if what you're looking for in the Red Sonja book is military strategization, I think if you enjoy that, you're going to love this. I personally think this is the better version of that. Again, that's me making a judgment.
Well, you're talking about history versus fiction, so it's not
exactly, yeah,
accurate. You can't compare the two.
No, and I said it's an unfair comparison. But as far as just a display of military strategy depicted in comics, this I think is doing a better job. But that's not to diminish the fact that there is a lot to like in that other book. But so yeah, if you can find this, go pick it up. I don't have the physical copies. I got it off Comixology. They were having a sale a while back, so I'm reading it digitally. The formatting of this book, and I will say, I know that people don't like, Craig and Matt in particular, they don't like American comics digitally, but the formatting for this comic is not the standard formatting for what you would see in American comics. It's still portrait, so it's not quite landscape's not horizontal, but the dimensions are different enough to where even if you're reading this on a regular computer screen and not tablet, I think you'll still find a fair amount of satisfaction in that. But also get on Amazon or go to your local comic shop if they're open and pick this up, because it's absolutely stunning. It is a brilliant, one of the best war comics, or at least best war comics depicting the 19th century type of warfare that I've ever read. I'm in love with this series.
Well, I'll have to see if we can find that locally from our local comic book store, if they can order them.
Well, I'm just hung up on the fact that they depicted Napoleon as non-empathetic, who doesn't care about his men, because that is radically inaccurate, and it really throws me out of the whole story. Napoleon's men loved him because of the way he treated his men. That's how he took over the country after being exiled, was only because his men loved him. When he walked onto the battlefield alone and opened his shirt and said, "If you would kill your emperor, do it now," and the entire military of France immediately went behind him because of the way he treated his men. So for them to depict him as non-empathetic to his men is 100 complete fucking bullshit.
No.
Either didn't do their job or is.
I think you took it the wrong way. I think you took what I said the wrong way. His men absolutely love him in this book, and when he is among his men, you can understand why they loved him. Because when he is out there talking to his troops, he is 100% the type of rallying military figure that you can imagine these men will do anything for. When he walks into his tent and he's with his two generals, where they are talking about the sacrifices they are going to have to make, and they say, "Hey, if you do this, a lot of our people are going to die." He says, "Well, they're going to die for the good of their empire. Do it because it's the only way we have to win." In that moment, he absolutely cares more about the empire and winning this war than the bodies that they're going to have to crawl over to do it. That is not to say that he's not going to feel that loss, but he makes the hard choice right then.
Well, that's different from being non-empathetic then. That's completely different than what you said. He was non-empathetic.
In that moment, he's absolutely non-empathetic. He is more concerned with spreading his empire than he is concerned with the bodies of his men. Because he's concerned. I mean, look, he's spreading an empire to spread an empire, right?
But the thing about empathy, what you're saying is different from having no empathy. No empathy means he doesn't give a shit, not that he's making a hard decision. If you say someone is non-empathetic, that means I don't give a shit how many men die. Not there. Yes, I realize that it's going to be a difficult sacrifice. It's two totally different things.
Well,
non-empathy is saying a leader is non-empathetic and is willing to sacrifice their men. That's a tyrant who doesn't give a shit about the people that he's leading. They'll sacrifice whatever they have to get what they want. And that's not who Napoleon was.
On some level, if Napoleon gave a shit about the lives of his men, he would have taken over France and been done with it. Napoleon spread an empire. Napoleon craved power, and he may have been a good rallier, but Napoleon spread his empire for the spreading of an empire.
But he spread the empire.
There was no altruism here.
Yeah, he was spreading the empire for the security and strength of his nation.
Yeah, for the same reason everybody else spread an empire, also for land.
The surrounding nations of France have had a long history of invading France for years.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
For him to secure his empire wasn't just for fun because he, quote, just wanted power. He was doing it because he wanted power, because there was security and power in Europe. That's why Europe has had such eons of war. Because there's so many
single
countries.
One of those monarchical figures and largely authoritarian figures were all doing imperialization. It was all about how much land can you amass.
But it's my point is it's not just because he wanted power. It's about security for your people. Because of the history of the region.
That's the same excuse that I've heard to justify wars in Iraq my entire life. So
no. but we're not talking about the wars in Iraq. I'm talking about the wars in Europe and why Napoleon did what he did. It's two different things. I mean, people use that excuse.
Yes.
But that's that excuse for Iraq. You go on to that. But I'm talking about the reality of what happened in the Napoleonic Wars.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just, it's like people like the thing about it's on that same topic. People love to joke about how France just loves to surrender. They love to surrender. And what a big joke that is. Those people are completely ignorant on military strategy. They're completely ignorant on why.
Fact that the French underground, they were also, I mean, there's lots of reasons France surrendered besides the fact that they just didn't want to fight. To save a whole lot of culture and to save everything else.
That thing, the French surrendering, all of that mentality came decades after the war.
Yeah. I mean, this is this is 1806 versus 1940.
Yeah.
And
Well,
also
my
the
point-
only thing that saved France.
My
that saved that
point
history and
is
culture.
and it's the same point of why Napoleon did what he did. What you've got, the France's place in the world, they have very few physical barriers to their enemies, as opposed to, say, the United States, which has got huge protective barriers to their enemies.
Yeah, oceans.
Right. And let's say Sweden. Sweden is nothing but a nation of passes, which means it's nothing but a nation of choke points. That's why nobody ever invades Sweden. France is the most disadvantaged in its area. So to protect, quote, France as it exists without expansion is a military impossibility. So expansion is the only way to achieve security in that part of Europe.
I mean, Napoleon also tried and had plans in going into Africa and doing everything else. Again, I think there is a washed version of Napoleon because largely history is written by the victors. I mean, I think Queen Elizabeth had some of this in her too.
The history written by the victors thing is a big misnomer, by the way. History is written by the losers a lot more than people realize. And I can give you a lot of examples on that if we want to go into it. But yeah, the whole history is written by the winners thing. People say that's an excuse. That is, yes, it is, but it's also written by the losers a lot. And that's why you get things like the Vikings depicted as evil baby-eating monsters, is because when they were just on this swath of invasion throughout Europe, they were depicted as these pagan, bloodthirsty demons, because that history is written by the people they were invading. Hannibal, the way the Romans wrote their experience with Hannibal was based on them losing battle after battle after battle. Hannibal.
I mean, but counterpoint to that, a lot of that narrative comes from the Catholic Church, who were the victors in that battle because they were pagans. I mean, and the Catholic Church did that to everyone.
I'm not saying it's not ever written by I'm just saying people like to throw that, history is written by the winners thing like it applies broad. No, it does some, but there's a lot of history written by the losers as well.
Anyway, Matt likes imperialization, and the battle was great. That's what we learned from this.
Napoleon is one of my favorite historical figures because he's hailed as the greatest military strategist that's ever lived. So I've always been very, very interested in Napoleon. So yeah, whenever I hear something that, frankly, gets my dander up. Of course, military history is a big interest in mine anyway. Mm-hmm. So when I hear somebody make I hear a leader depicted inaccurately, I'll just say it inaccurately, it gets my dander up.
Nah, he's depicted accurately. He was a bloodthirsty bastard, so they let it know.
Incorrect.
This is being written by French people, so I trust them more.
Oh, so it's based on race. You hear that, Craig?
Yeah.
French is not a race. French is a nationality. Get it right.
What'd you read by French?
I love these debates you guys have every week. Oh, man.
Oh, my God. So I read, real quick on mine. I wasn't going to go into mine real deep anyway. I read issue number 6 from DC's Young Animal imprint. This is Far Sector by N.K. Jemisin and Jamal Campbell. This one, first of all, Jamal Campbell's art is freaking great in this series. Is outstanding. I've mentioned this series before. Some standouts about this one. Of course, again, this is about a young Green Lantern stationed in a deep, deep sector of space, and she's assigned to a planet of which is a mix of a lot of different alien races and cultures. The leadership of this planet years ago decided to, I guess you would say, they have like a satellite technology that de-emotionalizes the populace. The populace does not feel emotions. However, there's an underground drug available where you take the drug, you can feel emotions. So what this series is exploring is the pros and cons of emotion playing into people's decisions. The leaders that are not feeling emotions don't empathize with the populace, so they make choices without the populace's safety as a concern or the repercussions of. They don't care. Meanwhile, if those same leaders take the drug and feel those emotions later, they deal with those repercussions.
I hear that's what Napoleon does.
Yeah, you probably did. That's probably in the same comic that Caleb wrote, that he was taking drugs. But the overall, it's just it's a fun story. It's interesting. It's well written. N.K. Jemisin's a very accomplished writer. I've read some of her prose books. The main character is a young African-American female. Some little touches I really appreciate as she is depicted. I mean, she looks like she's about 5'5". She's got a big booty on her. She's not a traditional superhero, depiction. Little touches like that I appreciate. The dialogue is very, very good. She's depicted as she takes her job very seriously. Her emotions are downplayed. She's very careful to how she presents herself. She's very professional. I mean, one of the leaders of the political leaders of this nation visits her apartment one day, and he's making a come on to her. He's basically, and he's trying to figure out how to converse with a human being, and he got some quote cultural pointers, and that doesn't come across. He's not successful, I'll say. One funny thing, she finally just says, "What are you doing here? What are your intentions?" And he goes, "Well, courtship. I find you very attractive for a female without fins." Which I thought was a really great line. so she was not complimented by that, as one would expect. So it's a different type of read. It's outside my normal wheelhouse. That's why, occasionally I pick up books that are completely out of my wheelhouse to see, how I like them. And this one, I'll admit, an issue or two kind of almost lost me, but there's always one or two at least very big standout moments in this series that keep me on it. And smart. It's a very smart, well-written book. Warren Ellis in particular keeps bragging about this book.
The writer on this book is a prose author, correct? Generally?
Her background and her success has been in sorcery fantasy books.
See, I always feel like it takes you almost have to read their work when you have a prose author that comes over to comics. You almost have to read it in trade or arcs at a time, because they tend to write more for a story arc than does that make sense? Than a monthly release.
I could see.
I find Ta-Nehisi Coates the same way.
Yeah,
but if I read his stuff in arcs, I enjoy it better.
Yeah, it's a different rhythm than a prose book, than your typical prose book, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
The transitions are what always get me, especially before they get used to writing like comic scripts. Like moment to moment, even inside the single issues, transitions I always find rocky when a prose author first comes over. But it usually doesn't take them long. Like guys like Saladin Ahmed, who came from prose. If you read Abbott, like that's one of the best things he's ever written. It just takes him a little time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been collecting this. I haven't read it yet, but I intend to. For that very reason, I've been kind of waiting for the first arc to end. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it's nothing that's going to like knock your socks off. There's no huge emotional points into it. It's unusual. It's an unusual book for what it is, and frankly, the protagonist.
All right.
Nice. I hear good things. I need to check this out. Well, are we ready to kind of start bringing this thing home?
Yeah, I think so.
I think
Unless
so,
you
too.
guys want to argue about military strategy some more.
Matt's taking his strong anti-guillotine people stance. So
Anti-guillotine people. Man, that's a phrase I use at least twice a week.
No, Matt in his personal life is very pro guillotines.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can think of some I'd like to use it on, definitely.
Yeah, I think
For
we
sure.
I think we may have made mental notes. So, well, you know what? You know what happens next Wednesday? We finally get to start saying this again. Guess what happens?
New
Some.
comics.
Yeah. Some. Where
A
they're coming
handful of
from.
new, a handful of new comics.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about some of those new comics. Craig, what are you grabbing next week?
I'm going to grab Killadelphia #6 from Image Comics.
Nice.
Rodney Barnes and Jason Sean Alexander. This is the end of the first story arc. Will they be able to beat John Adams, the vampire John Adams? Probably not, because we have another story arc coming, so I doubt he dies.
Oh gosh,
It's fantastic.
It's funny. It's just funny.
The
Will he
funny
be able
part
to?
about it is he's doing this because he was so disrespected in life that he's taking over America as an undead vampire.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Dude, if you
John
haven't
Adams,
seen the
vampire.
Jason Sean Alexander art on this book, you got to look it up because it's. Whew.
Yeah, everything about this book's been good.
It's the hotness. Well, on this next week, basically a volume 2 of my favorite series of last year is coming out. Faithless #2, or Faithless 2 #1 is coming out, and I am giddy about it just because I need some more of that Maria Lovett good in my life.
So here's an interesting thing, because I buy variants.
Mm-hmm.
The variant cover actually came out this week.
Really?
So I was able to read it already.
Oh,
Huh.
Don't tell me.
Yeah, I won't tell you. It's really good though.
I want to experience it in real time. Like I just said, Maria Lovett is the artist on this beautiful, amazing, awesome, fantastic, need-to-read series, and Brian Azzarello is writing it. It is kind of a weird, queer, hypersexual deal with the devil story about a young artist who, gets drawn into some craziness, at least in the first series. If you hadn't read that, you got to. Like I said, it was my favorite series of last year. Cannot get enough of it, and
So good.
I need this book in my life.
So I'm looking forward to #4 in the series Mountainhead from IDW by John Lees and Ryan Lee. I thought the series was just abandoned because it's been so long since the last issue came out. So I was really surprised to see that this was still a thing and is alive.
I feel like all of comics have been abandoned for the past couple of months.
Well, this one it has been a long time. Here's something that's kind of funny. The synopsis for this issue says, "The most shocking series of the year continues with its most relentlessly suspenseful chapter yet." I think they're over-delivering a little bit in the most shocking series of the year, but I'm looking forward to it nonetheless.
Well, sounds like the suspenseful part might be just waiting for the next issue.
Yeah. Well,
It's like
the
a Hickman book.
The most shocking. What's shocking is that it's still around. I'll say. No knock to the quality of the book. It's just been so long. I'm shocked that it's still around. That's all.
It does. It throws you off when you have to wait.
I mean, it has been a good 6 months since that last
Wow.
#3 came out. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, I remember you talking about like the first issue of this on the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
was that Matt? Because I want to say that like the first issue came out. Just put it in perspective. Jerry was still on the show.
No, that was me.
It was Matt that talked about
Okay.
it. But yeah, I think Jerry was still on the show at the time.
Yeah, because I remember he
Jerry
was
and Sean.
on it as well.
Yeah.
So, well, all right. There's some good books coming out next week. It's funny. We all picked. It looks like we all picked Image books.
Nope.
What is who's Mountainhead's publisher?
IDW.
Is it IDW? Okay, yeah. Well, okay, so we all picked independent stuff. So we could have had an Image-orama. We could have.
Image-orama.
Well, all right, y'all. we want to thank you for tuning in once again to the Southern Fried Geekery podcast. We really appreciate it. You want to do us a solid, you can leave us a rating and review on iTunes. But as always, the best way to let folks know about the podcast, if you want to, we would appreciate it, is just by word of mouth. You can feel free to go to any of our social media platforms and find the link and share it on your platforms and just say, hey, these guys are fun. They disagree with stuff like imperialism and whether or not imperialists were sociopaths or not. And they have fun conversations about it. And, just in general. And we have a great time.
Always got to get the last word.
One little sharp jab to the ribs.
I cannot imagine what's going to rope more people into the show than the discussions on imperialism.
You'd be surprised how controversial that is. You not being on Facebook, you might be surprised how that's an actual question. But no, dude, I love doing this podcast. I love talking about comics. Even more than that, I love getting a chat with my co-host, with you guys. It is inevitably, short of like sexy times with the hubs, the highlight of my week. And so I want to thank y'all for, even as crazy as the world is, still making time to do this, because I couldn't do it without you, and my life would be diminished if I didn't. I'm all smiles. So.
Yep.
And we debated whether to have a show or to do a BLM show this week or whatever, but I think that sometimes you just go on and do what we do every week, and I think that was the right call.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I think like we all talked about, 3 white dudes doing a podcast, really all we need to say is that we think Black Lives Matter, and that we would really love it if some changes would happen, and we'll support it when there does, but we let the people who are experts on the subject matter do the talking.
That's right.
And we listen.
That's right.
So
absolutely.
Short version of that is we stay in our lane.
Pretty much.
That's right.
And just show our support.
That's right.
Because that is what has repeatedly been asked of us, and what people are saying we need to do. And like I said, we listen. So we will be back. Of course we'll be back. We're not going anywhere. Are you kidding? Same time, same place. Maybe next week.
Maybe.
Unless we decide to meet in person. So I don't know when we've decided to do that, or if we maybe decide we want to have drinks or something. But keep us in touch, keep us in mind. If you need anything, holler at us. Come to our different social media sites. Plug yourself in. We love you for being you. That's all we ask, is that you be you, and we love you for it. So go forth and love some comics.
Woo!